Goodness me, I've been excited for this one. And for good reason. The Civic Type R is possibly one of the most celebrated hot hatchbacks ever. And from a driver's point of view, it's arguably the best in the world. And that's quite amazing, really, when you consider that Honda were quite late to the game with the whole hot hatch thing. In fact, their first Civic Type R came along in 1997, and that's 21 years after Volkswagen launched their first Golf GTI. You may be interested to learn, though, that the Civic wasn't the first Honda to have the Type R badge affixed to that hatch. In fact, it wasn't even a hatchback at all. You can see what's coming, can't you? That's right, we're doing a driven through time historic recap. Cue the voiceover. The first Type R came along in the form of the NSX. When the original NSX began production in 1990, it was always intended to be a world-class production sports car, but the Honda engineers decided it could be and should be even better, and thus the NSX Type R, or NSXR, was born. The Honda engineers started with a base model NSX Coupe and a big bag of spanners, and got to work with reducing the weight of the car rather drastically. Sound deadening, audio systems, the spare tyre, even the air conditioning and traction control modules were all removed in an effort to reduce weight. The standard power seats were also pulled out and replaced with carbon Kevlar Recaro equivalents, and the alloy wheels were thrown away to make way for lighter, forged alloy versions. Even the standard leather gearshift knob was pulled out and replaced with a sculpted titanium piece, something that's now become synonymous with Type R cars to this day. And thanks to their efforts, the engineers at Honda managed to reduce over 120 kilos of weight compared to the standard NSX, resulting in a final weight of just 1,230 kilos. A bit of fettling to the suspension resulted in a more aggressive geometry setup, and acceleration was improved with a 0 to 60 time of just 4.9 seconds, thanks to some high-performance engine components. And with that, two things had been achieved. Firstly, an extra special sports car, and secondly, a rather fantastic checklist for all future Type R models to comply with. Honda's second Type R came in the form of the 1995 Integra, and with the checklist written in development of the aforementioned NSXR, the result was quite impressive. The Integra Type R featured a hand-built engine with high compression pistons, undercut valves, and a revised intake and exhaust system, as well as suspension upgrades. The chassis was strengthened and weight was reduced with things like a 10% thinner windscreen and lighter wheels. The 96 to 97 spec even got rid of its airbags, air conditioning, rear windscreen wiper, radio, center console, clock, power steering, and anti-lock brakes for an even lighter car. In Japan, as a result, the Integra Type R was held in the same esteem as the Nissan Skyline GTR and the Subaru WRX STI. And closer to home, Evo magazine, who managed to get their hands on one, described the Type R as the greatest front-wheel drive performance car ever. And hold that thought, if you will. The first Civic Type R was developed and produced from September 1997 with the EK9 model of Civic. With that same checklist as the Integra, the first Civic Type R was lighter, stiffer, and had a fettled engine, producing an impressive, for the era, 182 horsepower and 160 Nm of torque at 7,500 RPM. Just like the first Integra Type R, though, the EK9 was only available to the Japanese domestic market, and it wouldn't be until the new millennium that Type R badges would be seen on cars outside of Japan. And so the new millennium arrived, and in 2001, the EP3 Honda Civic Type R was available for the first time to a global market. It was also the first Type R to be built outside of Japan. It was built right here, in the UK, at the Honda factory in Swindon, where a grand total of 24,334 cars were built for the European market. The EP3 also had a new 2-litre, 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated petrol engine and revved to a frankly bonkers 8,000 RPM. That granted a 0 to 60 time of 6.5 seconds and a top speed of 141 miles per hour. Autocar at the time described the EP3 as one of the most exhilarating and satisfying drivetrains of any car currently on sale. irrespective of price. They then went on to draw comparisons with engines from more expensive sports cars, including the M3 CSL and Porsche 911 GT3. And hold on to that thought too, if you will. The next generation of Civic Type R, known as the FN2, was created in 2007 with a completely new look and an extra dynamic geometry setup. The futuristic-looking FN2 once again had a considerably stiffer chassis and suspension setup, along with yet another 2-litre, 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated engine, this time producing 198 brake horsepower and 193 newton-meters of torque. Top Gear magazine described the FN2 as having a spaceship outfit, and later models were available with a limited slip differential to further enhance the road holding. The FK2 came up next, and thanks to a new turbocharged engine, it had a new nickname too, Turbo Rush. It came along in 2015, and with a very impressive 316 horsepower and 400 newton-meters of torque, this was the first turbocharged Civic Type R ever, and as a result, was the fastest one too, charging from 0 to 62 miles an hour in just 5.7 seconds, and with a top speed of 168 miles an hour. A few years later, in 2017, Honda's engineers were tasked with creating a hot hatch that would be the fastest front-wheel drive car ever around the Nürburgring. And so, the FK8 Civic came along. The FK8 Type R had a bespoke chassis, suspension, and steering setup to maximise the power transfer and high-speed stability. The design was far more muscular, with aerodynamics now being a key focus to the model. The new FK8 Type R used the same turbocharged 2-litre engine as the FK2, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the engineers completed their task by breaking the front-wheel drive pre-production record at the Nürburgring with a time of 7:43, 7 seconds faster than its predecessor, despite having the same powertrain. The records continued to be broken too, with the FK8 achieving a new lap record at Magny-Cours in France, Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium, Silverstone in England, Estoril in Spain, Hungaroring in Hungary, and Mount Panama in Australia. The FK8 could boast a very impressive 0 to 62 time of 5.8 seconds and a top speed of 169 miles an hour, making it the fastest Civic Type R ever. Until... And we are back in 2023 with this, the latest iteration of Honda's iconic Civic Type R. This is the FL5. Now, I'm going to hit you with a massive spoiler to this video. And no, I don't mean this one. No, I do in fact mean the fact that this car is genuinely chuffing brilliant. It's one of the best handling cars I've driven in recent history. I genuinely mean that. And I could ultimately end the video there by going, thanks for watching, it's really good, see you in the next video. But where's the fun in that? Let's work through some of the facts and figures and work out why this thing is so incredible to drive. And let's start at the front by talking about that amazing engine. There it is. This is the Honda Civic 2-litre, 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. Now, despite being only a 2-litre and only a 4-pot, this does produce a very impressive 329 horsepower and 420 newton meters of torque. It is pretty much the same engine that was seen in the previous iteration of the Type R, only with a few little tweaks, a slightly tweaked turbo, a slightly better remap, and some internal bits and pieces to make it a little bit more powerful. I believe it's about 10 horsepower more than the old model. Now, Honda claims that the engine, despite only being a 2-litre, and only being a 4-pot, will go from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 5.4 seconds. They also state that this car will top out at 170 miles an hour from a 4-pot 2-litre engine. Now, like all amazing hot hatches, as you probably know, the Civic Type R is of course based on a very good, very much loved, everyday hatchback. You only need to pop down to your local bingo hall to see what I mean by that, except there are quite a few differences between this one and the one that Grandma's driving to bingo. Firstly, it's wider and it's slightly lower, but it's also considerably lighter, over 100 kilos lighter than the non-Type R version, which of course makes it more dynamic and faster and better. Then there's things like the chassis bracing. The engineers at Honda have done amazing things to this car. They've added more bracing. They've put on lightweight components. The bonnet, for example, that's aluminium. That boot lid, that's made of some sort of composite material, makes it even lighter. And yeah, all in all, it's just a faster, stiffer, more engaging place to be. But there is one other thing that I feel we should address with this particular model, the FL5 of the Civic Type R, and that is the way that it looks. Because if, like me, you've always ummed and ahed at the idea of owning a Civic Type R because it looked a bit, what's the polite way of saying it, racy, well, this one doesn't. The previous iteration models of the Civic Type R had ridiculously wide arches and spoilers on top of other spoilers and plastic vents on the arches and more plastic bits mounted everywhere. It all looked a bit silly. But this one, well, it seems to be a bit more sensible. It's a bit more grown up. It's a bit more refined. And I think that's a good thing. Inside the car, it's equally subtle. Well, red seats and carpets and seat belts aside. But again, look at this interior. Look how sensible it is. Look how aesthetically pleasing it is. Look at these air vents on the front. Look at the design of the steering wheel, the simplification of buttons, actual buttons. The gear knob as well, that iconic lightweight aluminium gear knob. Everything just looks smart. It's very aesthetically pleasing. It's a nice place to be. And these seats, I should add, very comfortable. So, what about the technical brilliance of this car? Well, again, there's lots to talk about there as well. The car, other than being just a bit stiffer with a slightly stiffer chassis, has lots of other things that make it quite enjoyable to drive. The suspension, for example, is upgraded and incredible. It also has 3 modes as standard that you can play with to make it slightly firmer or slightly softer. The brakes are incredible. They've been upgraded with massive discs on the front and some fairly big discs on the back. And then, of course, being a hot hatch, it's been fitted with some quite posh rubber. At the moment on this, we've got Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's, which in my opinion are one of the best all-rounder tyres that you can fit to a car. So yeah, generally speaking, it's really quite good. And I will get out on the road very shortly to explain in greater detail what all of this does from a driving point of view. But before I do that, there is one thing that I feel I might need to address, and chances are it's something you're probably expecting me to talk about. Bear with me whilst I gather some notes. It does, of course, refer to the price. Now, the hot hatch market is fairly busy. It's quite well saturated, and I've got a few competitor cars here listed down with their on-the-road retail prices. The Cupra Leon, for example, you can get one of those for £28,700. The i30N Hyundai, drove one of those recently, did a review, it's on the channel, you can go back and watch that. That is on the road from £32,500. The John Cooperworks Mini, we also drove one of those not too long ago. That seems quite good value at £22,000. And the BMW M135, yes, that's right, BMW now making hot hatchbacks. That starts at £38,000. And what about the popular Volkswagen Golf R? Well, that one seems quite expensive at £41,800. Or does it seem expensive? Because this is more. The Honda Civic Type R, the FL5 that we are currently sat in, this exact car, I spec'd it up earlier to check, comes with a price tag of £49,090. That's quite a lot of money for a Honda Civic, let's be honest. So, it is a little bit more expensive than perhaps all the other hot hatches. But what if I tell you about the standard equipment list that this car comes with, and you might then think, maybe it's not so bad after all. You ready? High beam support system, that's automatic headlights for main beams when driving at night, cuts out the cars coming in the opposite direction so you don't blind people. Front and rear parking sensors, multiple driving modes, matte black 19-inch alloy wheels, LED headlights, adaptive cruise control, a digital driver's display, Honda's sensing safety features, that's things like when it realises the car in front of you is slowing down, gives you a little warning just to make sure you're alert and awake and realise what's going on, alloy gear lever and alloy pedals, the Type R triple exhaust on the back, a rear view camera, Honda Connect with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay built into the infotainment system here, plus these sports seats and a wireless charging pad for your phone. All of that comes as standard from 49 grand. Now, I haven't gone through the entire list of cars that I mentioned just now to see what the price would result at if I then ticked all those things as options, but I'm fairly sure the gap would be closing slightly if I did. Now, should we get on the road and I'll tell you more about this very brilliant car and why it's so brilliant to drive. So, driving the Honda Civic Type R. It's a video that's going to be mostly made up of celebration. I think you've probably established that. And let's be honest, who's that surprised? The Civic Type R in the first ever iteration was incredible. In comparison to other hatchbacks at the time, and even hot hatchbacks at the time, it was incredible. So, perhaps unsurprisingly, fast forward to 2022 and 2023, the new one is incredible. And there's a lot to love about this car. Before we set off, I mentioned about the fact that the car looks a bit more sensible, a bit more grown up. And inside, it's much the same. There aren't big, silly, fancy gauges anywhere. There are no big turbo gauges hanging out of any A-pillars or mounted in the middle of the dashboard, because let's be honest, we don't really need that. The infotainment system that comes in the car does provide all of that sort of information, so if you did want to take your Type R on a track day, you can see the boost gauges, you can see how much G you're pulling in the corner. It does it all, it shows you all that stuff. In fact, I can select that now on the entertainment system here with what's called Honda Log R. It's a clever system actually, because it shows you all the exciting usual things you would expect to see, like the G and the pull and the turbo pressure, that sort of stuff. But it also gives a 3D render of the car. As you go around a corner, it shows a render of the car in the right colour, I might add. And silly little things like if you touch the brakes on the infotainment system show that they're on. The lights, the brake lights come on. As standard, we have a fairly decent sound system. No doubt that can be upgraded if you want to, but this seems to work. There is one slight compromise, which is a fairly common theme with hot hatches, and that is the ride noise. It's quite noisy. Ride noise, of course, mean road noise. The Pilot Sport 4s, or Pilot Sport 4Ss, the Michelin tyres that are fitted to this car are fantastic, but they are quite noisy, and I'm guessing because of the high level of bracing, the stiffness of the chassis, and trying to keep weight down, so therefore not packing the car full of sound deadening, it does mean that the road noise is a bit intense. You do get used to it, but it's very much there, it's very much present. Now, from a comfort point of view, as I said before we set off, it's a very nice place to be. These seats are glorious. It's also worth mentioning that there is a lot of space and a lot of comfort in the back of the car as well. There are only 2 seats back there, but again, is that a complaint? Definitely not. I certainly wouldn't want 3 of me sat back there. But one thing I have discovered, in fact, while setting up GoPros to film in the back, I usually like to plug them in to keep the power going whilst I'm filming. I can't do that. There are no USB sockets back there at all. From an aesthetical point of view though, like I said before we set off, this is a very pleasant place to be. It's comfortable, it's been well thought out. My elbow rest points are just in the right place with soft furnishings, which is often quite unusual in a hot hatch. Usually it's packed out with more harder plastics, and things like your elbows can bash and get a little bit uncomfortable. But in here, this is really lovely with Alcantara or suede or something very similar all over the door cards there, and same for the central armrest, which is also a handy little storage box. But the screens themselves, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to typography and fonts, and it's all quite pleasantly laid out. According to the different driver modes you can go through, you get slightly different layouts on the instrument cluster. So at the moment I'm going along in an individual spec that I've picked, which basically means sporty engine but soft suspension and comfortable steering, and that gives me a kind of halfway house Type R interface on the front. If I want to go full bonkers crazy track day mode, I can hit the R button here and everything becomes a little bit stiffer in the suspension. Both the infotainment center screen becomes a little bit more dedicated to the track day stuff, and so does the dashboard here as well. But I'm not going to drive along in that setting for very long because, as you can probably tell, it is quite stiff for driving on the road. Power delivery in this is quite a wonderful thing as well, and that is mainly thanks to that wonderful glorious thing fitted up front known as an LSD, a limited slip differential. It's a blooming clever thing. You can feel it working through the corners. If you plant the power, especially on a day like today where it's a little bit damp, it's been raining in patches here and there, and therefore it means we're getting variable grip levels on the road. This thing somehow, when you put the power down, it just manages to prioritize that power. Putting 329 horsepower through the front wheels only of a car is asking quite a lot of physics. But fortunately, that diff is quite magical and does do magical things. And when I say this thing's good in the corners, I really do mean it. It's, what's the best way of saying it? Hilarious. Genuinely brilliant. This thing turns in like no other hatchback that I've ever experienced. You almost feel at times like the back end is just pivoting round. And the only other time that I've experienced cornering that feels as engaging and as sharp as this in a car that shouldn't feel as good as this, you'll understand where I'm getting to in a second, is when I've been driving cars like a 911 GT3. A 911 GT3 goes through corners in ways that your brain thinks it shouldn't be able to, and yet it does. And this Civic Type R does exactly the same thing. And that's all thanks to that fantastic combination: an aggressive geometry setup, amazing suspension, fantastic tyres, and of course, the LSD. Magical thing. I'm almost a little bit sad because when I did book this Type R from the Honda press office, they did give me the option of driving on track. And in fact, they said, "Are you planning to take it on track?" I didn't really have enough time to get all of that sorted, so there isn't going to be any track driving in this particular review. But now that I've driven it on the road, and especially on some of the fun roads around where I live, I am quite regretting that, because I feel like this on a track day would be hilariously good. In fact, I don't think that, I know it. I know this thing on track would be hilariously good. I'm just lucky that I have some fairly fun and engaging roads local to me that mean I can get a little brief snippet, a little glimpse of how good this thing could be at, say, Cadwell Park or the Nürburgring, which is worth mentioning. This car set the front wheel drive production car lap record, 7:44, I believe. And let me just remind you, it's a 2-litre 4-cylinder engine. What a car, what a car, what a day, just what an incredible thing. The FL5 really is like a bigger, better, slightly more grown-up version of the already iconic Civic Type R. And it's one worth celebrating. I've used the GT3 analogy a couple of times in this video already, and I'm going to stand by it. I know for a fact I'm not the first to say it, but this thing really is like a front-wheel drive 911 GT3. Does all the things that a sports car would do and could do, with the ability to be an absolute hooligan, a hero, a sports car, a fun car, a track day car, set lap records at the Nürburgring. It does it all. And I should point out, I've been doing 34 mpg today, even whilst hooning around. The Honda engineers that built this car should be very proud. Thank you for watching today's video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content just like this. And we have got loads to come in the next month or two, including a ride on the new Ducati Desert X. Yes, we do bikes as well, plus a week with a Lotus Emira, and yeah, I'm saving the best till last, a week with a Dacia Sandero. Yes, really. Don't also forget to check out our social feeds at Driven Chat, and to see everything that we do, check out the website driven.site, and there you will see the entire back catalogue of videos, as well as written articles, as well as photographs, and of course the thing that we are perhaps most famous for, our weekly podcasts. They're all there too, as well as of course being in all the usual podcast places. So if you like listening to podcasts and you like hearing people talk about cars, just search for the Driven Chat podcast as well. For now, I'll say thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.